System, if you can take your seats, please. Is Chris. Okay, good evening to all. Thank you so much for joining us in this session on value chains for resilient agri-food systems. My name is Máximo Torero. I am the Chief Economist of FAO, and I would like to welcome you to this special event, Value Chains for Resilient Agri-Food Systems, organized together with my colleagues of WFP. David Catrud from WFP is representing WFP today with us. The topic to be discussed today is extremely important because our value chains have been facing multiple and simultaneous disruptions and crises. From the COVID-19 pandemic, we show the importance of logistics, to climate shocks, El Niño now in 2023, 2024, conflicts, and the war, to name a few. So this has brought three core elements that we need to look in value chains carefully, and this session is trying to cover all these three elements. First, the importance of resilience in value chains for smallholders, for medium, and for large. The problems that we faced in COVID-19 apply to all. Second, how we can improve efficiency across the value chains so that we can be more efficient in the way we use our natural resources and we produce. And finally, the new roles that value chains have to play with the changes and the risks and uncertainties that we are going to be facing in the future. I do hope with this esteemed panel we have here today, we can discuss some of the recommendations, solutions, and initiatives that will make value chains more resilient, ensure access to healthy diets, and contribute to sustainable agri-food systems. Let me now, before starting our panel discussion, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. David Laborde, Director of the FAO Agri-Food Economic Division, for a technical presentation. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maximo, and thanks everyone to be here. Distinguished guests and participants. So I have 5 minutes, so don't expect a lot of technicalities. Now, I think that we already see what the scene we have in front of us look like. The last SOFI report that we released a couple of weeks ago, we are showing that we have 735 million people in chronic hunger. And while a large share of this increase comes from the COVID-19, we have not recovered. And I think that's very important. We are dealing with multiple crises. The system today is still resilient because we are talking about shocks that in the last 15 years we have never seen. If you think combination of conflict, the COVID-19, 3 La Nina on a row, and now an El Nino, and I will say still 735 million people, not 1 billion. But we are pushing the system to its extreme, and we need to deal with this reality. So the first point I want to make is when we talk about resilience, we can think about resilience at different levels. We can think resilience of household, of farms, of value chain. But today, in particular with the summit, we have to think in terms of system thinking. And it's a combination of resilience of these different value chains, and both of domestic and international actions. If you are managing a livestock sector, you don't care so much if the maize sector is eaten heavily if you have alternative, like sorghum or barley for some animals. But also you don't care so much if you bring your maize from Brazil or from the US. So thinking about resilience at different states can lead to different responses. And I think today, for instance, in the panel, we are lucky to have Dr. Fowler that will talk about VAX, where you can see a combination of different actions. You can take some crops and you want to make them more resilient to climate shock, but you may want also to change the portfolio of crops to get resilience through diversification. And I think it's what we have to keep in mind. The second point I want to make is actually we need to understand the drivers of resilience, because it's a combination of risk and hazard and how much you are exposed to some of this situation. And so you need to understand this part of the problem, how your people and system are vulnerable, but also what are their capacity to cope with shocks. And if you start to see these different drivers, you can start to define solution. The third point I want to make is about this solution. Some have to be taken and implemented long time before the shocks. Some can be linked to research and development. And you will see in 15 years, potentially, the resilient benefit of some action you take today. But you know also to invest in early warning system, for instance, that will start to help you understanding what is coming. And when the shocks start to develop, take first anticipatory action that were critical and reduce the cost of dealing with solution, but also starting to scale up social safety net. So I already talked about elements like research and development and social safety net. There is no one silver bullet that deals with the resilience issue. That's where the system thinking is important. But then after the shock, you also need to have the right solution to help the recovery. Because if you end up with a large level of debt, for instance, at the country level or the household level, actually your resilience has decreased. So the type of action you take after the shock are also pretty important. Same thing when we think about nutrition. Generations that are born in the middle of the crisis are going to pay the price for all their life if you don't start to intervene to recover the lost months or years, and even it's particularly difficult. And finally, the last point I want to make is resilience is going to take different shape and intensity depending on your point of view. If you are in Europe, for instance, today, and you think about what has happened in 2022, and you think about the resilience of your value chain, and complex global value chain where logistics is going to be important, finance is going to be important, geopolitics are going to be important, you are dealing with different challenges that if you are in the Republic of Central Africa, for instance, and you are some small farmers that are connect to market but also do a lot in terms of self-sufficiency, and therefore something that we also do at FAO is to think about these different solutions in different contexts. And in particular, in fragile context, where the type of toolbox you need has to be suited to that, in order also that, when you deploy humanitarian response, you at the same time build resilience, and that's also something that your colleague of WFP are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. So, colleagues, we have just 1 hour, so we are going to be very tough on the time for each of the speakers. So we have an amazing panel. I am not going to present all at the same time. I'm going to present one by one so that we can hear from all of them as soon as possible. Now, the panel have some guiding questions, and the questions are meant to enable participation to share their experiences, exchange knowledge and ideas. And the round of interventions will be limited to one, and all participants are encouraged to actively engage around the following questions. How can we make value chains more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable to better respond to different shocks and ensure food security and access to healthy diets? Second, what are the risk management strategies, coping, and resilient-oriented mechanisms that could be adopted by the countries? And third, how can public and private partners and stakeholders better support value chain development and build resilient agri-food systems? So we have 45 minutes. Each of the panelists will have maximum 5. So after 5, I will need to ask you to stop. Apologies for that from the beginning. So let me start with His Excellency Mohamed Abdur Razake, Minister for Agriculture of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I thank FAO for selecting me as one of the panelists on an important topic, value chain for resilient agri-food system. Development of sustainable, nutrition-sensitive agri-food value chain is the foundation for resilient agri-food system in countries such as Bangladesh, where a large proportion of population is dependent on agriculture and allied activities. In Bangladesh, for instance, nearly 2/5 of our labor force is engaged in agriculture, and over 4/5 of rural households get at least a part of their income from agriculture. We see development of agri-food value chain as the means for job-led economic growth. Sustainable food and nutrition security with safe and profitable modern agriculture is the overarching goal of Bangladesh National Agriculture Policy. This can happen only through the development of sustainable and resilient agri-food value chain. The plan of action formulated by our government for implementing the National Agriculture Policy has crop diversification and production of safe and nutritious food, and development of safe and quality agri-food value chain and the agro-processing sector as a major thrust areas. Our pathway commitment at the UFSS 2021 also emphasizes this respect. I would like to share some of the initiatives being taken by our country under the ongoing 8th five-year plan. Infrastructure is being improved, identified in rural growth centers and markets around the country to enable better market linkages, given that around 85% of our farmers are smallholder farmers with less than a hectare of land. Specialized markets are being developed to reduce intermediaries and improve their profitability. We see formation of producer groups as well as contract farming as a means of enhance their economies of scale in processing and marketing, thereby increasing competitiveness and profitability. Along with market facilities, the storage, transport, and communication infrastructure are also need to be enhanced. Use of digital technology in all stages of their agri-food value chain, from production to post-harvest management, is helping to enhance efficiency. The use of ICT for agriculture and market linkages is being expanded to enable critical flow of information and advisory services to farmers in rural and urban areas for their price with profit margin. Our aim is to make agriculture attractive for youth and to make them entrepreneurs to increase their engagement in the sector. Agriculture risk management strategies coping with a resilient-oriented mechanism include adoption of appropriate technologies for precision agriculture and real-time market information, research on stress-tolerant crop varieties and their promotion through extension, strengthening the capacity of smallholder farmers to access both inputs including finance, market for their produce, and development of agro-processing sector through value addition technologies and investment in necessary infrastructure, including storage, cold chain, and reliable transportation. Agriculture characterized by large majority of smallholder farmers, one way say, is the largest private sector in the economy. More public sector and private business and partnership and multi-stakeholder partnership in agriculture is crucial for the growth and prosperity of agri-food system. This calls for collaborative effort between the government, private business sector, civil society, and international organizations to work towards the common goal. Effective enforcement of policies and regulation, co-investment in research, financial support for technology adoption, access to quality inputs and markets, and knowledge sharing will contribute to an environment that encourages private enterprise and job-led growth in the agri-food sector. In Bangladesh, we have embarked on an ambitious agricultural transformation program under the framework of FAO hand-in-hand initiative. We have, through a multi-stakeholder consultative process, identified climate-smart technology development and dissemination, irrigation and water management, specialized and multipurpose cold storage, post-harvest and supply chain management, and agro-processing, marketing, and commercialization as the priority areas for investment to develop and strengthen the value chain for resilient agri-food system. Regional and global partnership for knowledge sharing, technology exchange, and leveraging finance are also crucial in this context. With the right direction and initiative, some of the coalition of action that have been formed under the UFSS+2, I believe, can also support this process and trigger the transformation change for resilient agri-food value chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. So you show us how the transformation that is huge, what is happening in Bangladesh, and how the means of implementation through hand in hand is helping to bring infrastructure, improve quality of seeds, and an ambitious agricultural transformation program, as you said, that help us to increase resilience through investment. Thank you so much. Let me now pass the floor to His Excellency Brian Acheampong, Minister of Food and Agriculture of the Republic of Ghana. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moderator. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important panel discussion on value chains for resilient agri-food systems. I speak today affirming the commitment made by His Excellency the President of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, made in 2001 on the Food Systems Summit on pathways to advance transformative food systems in the short, medium, and long term. Ghana's food systems pathways is forward-looking, with the highest political will ever to deliver food and healthy diets to all Ghanaians, as well as fight hunger and malnutrition. Well, having taken office as a new minister, we've taken some bold steps to infuse innovation and private sector-led interventions into our flagship program, the Planting for Food and Jobs. It is worth noting that Ghana was the first African country to meet the first Millennium Development Goal of halving poverty and hunger. Hunger in Ghana decreased by 75% between 1990 and 2004. However, in 2020, when the COVID started in Ghana, the nationwide comprehensive food security and vulnerability analysis estimated some 5% of our population became food insecure, with about 2 million people likely to fall in this vulnerable group. Other factors contributing to weaknesses in our agri-food systems include weakness in the coordination among our stakeholders, our aging farmer population. We have 3.5 million farmers in Ghana, most of them about 50 years. Inadequate capacities of actors in our commodity value chains, over-dependence on rain-fed agriculture, inadequate feed for livestock and poultry, limited access to markets, and then a rising import bill. Well, considering all these challenges that I have mentioned, we have decided that we are going to pay attention to address the hunger and malnutrition, which is feeding the entire population with healthy and affordable diets, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate change and resulting in a sustainable ecosystem in our new Planting for Food and Jobs program. Moderator, we are doing quite well, as my president announced yesterday, of the new Planting for Food and Jobs program. This phase will focus on the input credit system to address the challenges we are facing in our agri-food system. The idea is to move our farmers from peasant farming, which is a 1 acre, half an acre type of farming, into a more smallholder commercial farming from a minimum of 5 hectares to, as a smallholder farm, to about 50 hectares as a large-scale commercial farmer. We believe that poor farmers, as we characterize most of our peasant farmers, cannot continue to feed our growing population of 32 million, and therefore we need to move into some aspects of commercial farming. But as you go into commercial farming, there are challenges that you will encounter in terms of the environment. And therefore, we encourage the adoption of climate-resilient practices, such as drought-resistant and flood-tolerant crop varieties, irrigation, and climate-smart technologies as we move into our second phase of our planting for food and jobs. We also want to invest in sustainable practices such as organic farming, water conservation, and soil management. As we move into this phase, we want to diversify our crops and livestock by encouraging farmers to vary their crops and livestock as they produce, because as they produce, the risk associated with over-reliance on a single crop becomes a challenge. Moderator, we also intend to modernize our processing and our marketing. Of course, post-harvest challenges continue to be a problem as where we produce our products in rural areas mostly and lack the right logistics to transport the produce into the market. Government intends to invest heavily to reduce post-harvest losses and ensure a steady supply of produce to our markets. We also intend to invest in the processing and value addition by providing the necessary drying and milling, fermentation and packaging as an integrated and value add to the program that we intend to implement. Our strategy is to reduce food loss and waste throughout the entire value chain from production to consumption, and it will be pursued vigorously. Moderator, we also intend to expand our market through the ECOWAS platforms and then also the AFCTA that we are fortunate to be hosting in Ghana. We want to leverage on it to reach the 1.3 million population throughout Africa to be able to export our excess produce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Minister, your planting for food and jobs is a great idea, and we see that the transformation, like in the case of Bangladesh, is already happening in your country, so we hope this keeps moving forward and accelerating. So we went from Bangladesh, Asia, to Africa, and now we go to Brazil. And Brazil has gone through a huge transformation for several years with knowledge, and you are one of the bigger exporters in the world today. So, Mrs. Fernanda Machiavelli Morao Oliveira, Vice Minister of Rural Development and Family Farming of the Federative Republic of Brazil, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes a todos y todas. Yo voy a hablar en español. Gracias por la invitación. Es una alegría estar aquí compartiendo las experiencias de Brasil con ustedes. Hacía tiempo que yo no era la única mujer en una mesa, entonces qué bien que estamos aquí representadas. Y me gustaría decir que hoy nosotros, aunque nosotros en Brasil seamos grandes exportadores, como dijo mi señor Tonero, yo voy a hablar aquí por la agricultura familiar, que es el ministerio que ha sido recreado por el presidente Lula. Y hoy celebramos el Día Internacional de la Agricultura Familiar, que estos agricultores familiares representan 77% de los establecimientos rurales en Brasil y son los grandes responsables por la producción de alimentos. Estoy hablando sobre campesinos, colonos de la reforma agraria, pueblos indígenas, pescadores, comunidades tradicionales, que permiten que los sistemas alimentarios sean menos monótonos en Brasil, garantizando una producción más diversificada. Aunque tengo mucho menos responsabilidad en el proceso de deforestación, son mucho más vulnerables a los impactos del cambio climático. En ese sentido, Brasil desarrolla importantes políticas para apoyar la creación de cadenas de valor más resilientes, inclusivas y sostenibles. Tuvimos este año, por ejemplo, una sequía terrible en el sur del país, una de las partes más productivas de nuestro territorio. Y tuvimos que aprender, estamos teniendo que aprender cómo adaptar regiones que en el pasado podrían producir muchísimo a los cambios climáticos. Retomamos este año el plan de cultivos para la agricultura familiar. Entre las principales medidas se encuentran la reducción de las tasas de interés para la producción de alimento y para la transición agroecológica. Infelizmente, Brasil todavía practica tasas de juros de interés muy altas y nosotros entonces tenemos que apoyar a los agricultores familiares en este proceso de producción de alimentos. Perdimos, solo para que tengan una idea, más de 1 millón de hectáreas de producción de feijão, beans, en los últimos 10 años. Entonces, estamos intentando revertir este proceso. También pasamos a financiar maquinaria agrícola para reducir el sufrimiento del trabajo en el campo. Hoy en Brasil solamente 18% de las propiedades rurales tienen acceso a cualquier tipo de maquinaria. Los restantes están trabajando todavía con la enxada, de forma manual, que es muy dramático. También reducimos el costo del seguro agrícola para la producción de alimentos y hicimos la expansión del programa de microcrédito con foco en las mujeres rurales. El gobierno de Brasil puso a disposición 15.000 millones de dólares en estas medidas solo para agricultores familiares, más 60 millones para los grandes y medios, pero son 15.000 millones de dólares para estas medidas que son focadas en la producción de alimentos. Es importante señalar que estas políticas de crédito diferenciado tienen un aspecto inclusivo. Son medidas que cuentan con líneas de crédito especiales para mujeres, jóvenes, pueblos y comunidades tradicionales. Pero producir no es suficiente, es necesario entregar los alimentos a los ciudadanos, especialmente los producidos por agricultores familiares, de la forma directa, rápida y más económica posible. Entonces, retomamos también para garantizar una demanda estable a los agricultores familiares los programas de compras públicas. Hicimos, como tenemos también 30 millones de personas en situación de inseguridad alimentaria, retomamos el programa de adquisición de alimentos, a través del cual el gobierno compra directamente a los agricultores familiares los alimentos saludables producidos y los distribuye para la red socioasistencial. Otra política para este fin, tenemos programas también como alimentación escolar y el programa de compras institucionales que también han sido retomados. Otro programa política pública es la retomada de los estoques de las reservas públicas de alimentos para evitar para evitar los cambios muy bruscos en los precios. Para completar este ciclo es necesario capacitar a los productores de alimentos para que puedan anticiparse a los posibles riesgos climáticos, identificar soluciones preventivas y medios de adaptación. En este sentido, establecemos el Pacto de Asistencia Técnica y Extensión Rural, enfocados en soluciones sostenibles como las técnicas agroecológicas. En Brasil tenemos una región semiárida con bioma único en el mundo que es la Caatinga. Después de muchas décadas luchando contra las sequías, en los años 2000 entendimos que el camino sería convivir con la sequía a través de adaptaciones productivas y tecnologías sociales. Cisternas de agua para consumo y para producción, patios productivos, microcrédito, fomento productivo, asistencia técnica son parte de las estrategias ampliamente utilizadas para la inclusión productiva con excelentes resultados. Aprendimos que, con el compromiso y participación de todos los actores involucrados, podemos construir sistemas agroalimentarios más resilientes y sostenibles para garantizar la seguridad alimentaria y el acceso a dietas saludables para nuestra población de Brasil y más allá. Nuestro desafío ahora es crear políticas de una segunda generación, después que van a conectar los instrumentos de la política agrícola con las as políticas ambientales e de seguridad alimentaria, que andemos conectándolas, conseguir superar los desafíos que están colocados hoy en la producción de alimentos en las cadenas de valor. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. So you brought clarity on what means no one left behind and the importance of having two institutions, two ministers at the same time to have policies especially targeted to family farming. So thank you so much for bringing the inclusion into the agricultural system that is a model that other countries can look at it and also learn from it. Let me now pass the floor and we move back to Africa and to North Africa. To Mr. Rudouan Arash, Secretary General, Minister of Agriculture, Maritime and Fisheries, Rural Development, and Water and Forest in the Kingdom of Morocco. And Morocco has gone through an amazing transformation with the Plan Green Vert. So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Maximo. À mon tour, je tiens à vous remercier pour avoir tenu ce panel très important sur les chaînes des valeurs et leur rôle dans la transformation du système alimentaire. Alors, pour commencer, je dois premièrement préciser que pour parler de la transformation, qui est un niveau ultime de la résilience, on parle de l'absorption, puis à l'adaptation, puis à la transformation. Et parler de la résilience et parler de la transformation, à mon avis, on parle de la même chose, étant l'étape ultime de la résilience des chaînes de valeur. Alors, ça dépend. La résilience, c'est-à-dire de notre propre expérience, ça dépend des filières, ça dépend des chaînes de valeur. Ça dépend des types aussi de ces chaînes de valeur. Il y a la production, il y a la transformation, la distribution, puis il y a la consommation. Et donc, leur niveau d'intégration dépend aussi, il détermine la manière de travailler sur la résilience et de construire la résilience. Lorsqu'on est sur des chaînes de valeur intégrées, et je donne des exemples, par exemple dans les chaînes de valeur de production du lait, les chaînes de valeur de production de viande, les chaînes de valeur de production de sucre, elles sont relativement beaucoup plus intégrées que d'autres chaînes de valeur encore plus traditionnelles. Et donc la manière d'adresser cette question de résilience dépend aussi de ce niveau de développement. Il dépend aussi de la structure de ces chaînes de valeur. Là, comme on a vu au Brésil, là où il y a beaucoup d'exploitations, de petites exploitations, d'exploitations familiales qui dominent la chaîne des valeurs, il est différent d'autres filières où il y a des exploitations relativement plus grandes. Donc tout ça amène à mener en réalité des politiques qui ciblent les catégories d'acteurs de notre système alimentaire ou bien des chaînes de valeur en général. Aujourd'hui, j'aimerais bien parler d'une expérience que nous tenons à partager avec vous et qui est vraiment une expérience de transformation des chaînes de valeur agroalimentaires au Maroc, qui a commencé avec la mise en place d'une grande stratégie en 2008, qui est la stratégie Plan Maroc Vert, et qui aujourd'hui s'inscrit dans la continuité avec la nouvelle stratégie qui a démarré en 2020 et qui est la stratégie Génération Green. Donc on est dans le même état d'esprit de transformation et de construction de la résilience des chaînes de valeur agroalimentaire. Et qu'est-ce qu'on apprend de notre expérience? Premièrement, quels sont les leviers qui permettent de construire la résilience des chaînes de valeur? Donc de cette expérience qui a duré pratiquement depuis 2008 jusqu'à actuellement, premier élément, l'investissement. Il faut maintenir l'investissement agricole et agroalimentaire dans les chaînes de valeur. Sans investissement, on ne peut pas parler de résilience et de transformation du système alimentaire. Donc, on doit appuyer l'investissement dans les chaînes de valeur. Et pour vous donner un ordre de grandeur, en 2008, nous avions un niveau d'investissement dans le secteur agricole qui représentait à peine 4 ou 5% de l'investissement public total dans le pays, alors que le secteur contribue à la richesse, à cette époque, à 13 ou 14% de la valeur ajoutée totale dans l'économie. Et donc, pour évoluer, redonner la place qu'il mérite au secteur agricole, il fallait augmenter l'investissement dans les chaînes de valeur à tous les stades. Et nous sommes passés de ces 5%, par exemple, à aujourd'hui à 11%. Et donc, en termes d'indice d'orientation agricole qui est publié régulièrement par la FAO, on est vraiment neutre. On revient au niveau d'investissement dans le secteur agricole qui est proportionnel au niveau de sa contribution dans la richesse nationale. Donc, mais l'investissement nécessite le financement. les petites exploitations qui dominent globalement nos chaînes de valeur, n'ont pas les capacités. Donc, il faut le financement qui doit aller avec. Et à côté du financement, il faut les incitations. Donc, les incitations ciblées qui vont à ces chaînes de valeur agroalimentaire. Et un des succès aussi de la transformation, c'est que nous avons réussi à mettre en place un système d'incitation qui encourage l'initiative privée, qui encourage les exploitations à investir dans leur équipement, dans leur transformation, dans la maîtrise du système d'irrigation, dans les semences, dans l'amélioration des conditions d'élevage des animaux, etc. Donc tout ça pour dire que l'investissement, son financement et les incitations qu'on vont avec sont essentiels pour la transformation et la résilience des systèmes des chaînes de valeur. Deuxième leçon d'expérience, c'est tout ce que j'appelle le dialogue au sein des chaînes de valeur agroalimentaire. Il y a deux niveaux. Il y a l'organisation des chaînes de valeur et il y a le cadre du dialogue dans les chaînes de valeur. Le cadre de dialogue que nous avons initié en 2008, sont les contrats programmes. C'est un contrat programme entre le gouvernement et les interprofessions. Et c'est là ce que j'appelle le dialogue, c'est parce que c'est plus un dialogue où on acte les engagements du gouvernement, les engagements de la profession, mais le processus de participation qui est important, où participent les producteurs, participent les distributeurs, les transformateurs, les transporteurs, les acteurs du marché. Et ce dialogue permet d'avancer et d'identifier les goulots d'étranglement pour vraiment construire la résilience de la chaîne des valeurs. Donc cette organisation, elle est importante. Et à mon avis, on ne peut pas avancer dans la résilience sans cette organisation au sein des chaînes de valeur agroalimentaires. Et à côté de ça, il y a les contrats programmes.
Minister, if you can wrap up, please.
J'ai plus le temps, donc je n'ai pas encore commencé réellement. Donc, je vais aller au troisième point, qui est l'adaptation, et je m'arrête là. Donc, j'ai dit l'investissement, il y a le dialogue au sein des filières à travers le secteur privé et le gouvernement, et il y a les stratégies d'adaptation. Ils doivent aller ensemble, et ces stratégies d'adaptation sont nécessaires. L'expérience marocaine aussi a montré que notre priorité, c'est l'eau, et donc nous avons construit toute notre adaptation sur la maîtrise de l'eau. Et la maîtrise de l'eau, aujourd'hui, nous avons un programme d'investissement dans le secteur de l'eau pour l'eau potable et pour l'irrigation, parce que avec les crises que nous avons vécues, avec les sécheresses, l'eau vraiment est devenue un débat de la place publique. C'est une question d'opinion publique, et donc les gens se demandent sur l'eau potable et quels sont les choix. Et nous étions vraiment confrontés à des choix difficiles qui assurent vraiment la résilience de ces chaînes de valeur entre donner de l'eau aux villes ou utiliser l'eau pour la production agricole pour offrir la nourriture. Donc il y a un programme d'investissement de 16 milliards de dollars à l'horizon 2030 qui va permettre de répondre à un grand nombre de questions liées à l'adaptation de notre système de l'eau. Je pense que j'ai épuisé le temps. Merci, à une autre occasion.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm sorry we have such a short time. I know the passion that you are putting on the green strategy and the importance of financing human capital and the adaptation that you are referring to. Thank you so much. Let me now pass the floor to Mr. Cary Fowler, Special Envoy of Global Food Security, United States of America. So, Cary, you're bringing together the past, the future, indigenous, climate, technology, and nutrition. So if you can explain that a little bit, how you are linking all those.
Thank you, Maximo. Good afternoon. First, I think we ought to all congratulate ourselves. We have all endured the extreme heat outside and many meetings inside. We've shown great resilience. I put two propositions before you today. The first is that the vulnerability of value chains increases when our dependency on just a few or just a single crop increases inappropriately. And the second proposition I put forward for your consideration is that providing options to farmers equals risk management. That's how we, in one way at least, provide risk management. I'll give you an example of what that means in practice. We in the U.S. government, and in this regard, I'll mention the State Department where I work and principally in the U.S. Agency for International Development, have a project that we have put up in collaboration with the African Union and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. This project, this initiative, is designed to identify the most promising crops for nutrition in Africa amongst the many, many traditional and indigenous crops in Africa. We're then asking ourselves the question, which of these crops that are nutritionally rich have the most potential in a climate-changed Africa? And based on that, which are the most nutritious crops and how will they perform in climate change, we'll have a rational basis for plant breeding and plant improvement efforts looking towards the future. The process has been generously supported by my friend next to me with the Rockefeller Foundation. We're about halfway through this process. We've identified about 40 crops that we think have great potential. We are looking forward to a meeting in November where we'll look at these crops through the lens of climate change. And then we hope to provide some financial mechanisms to provide ongoing support for plant breeding efforts for these crops. If we're going to have a stable, resilient food system, and if we're going to provide nutrition for everyone all year round, including for children that are suffering from malnutrition and stunting and wasting, certainly in Africa, then we need to provide options to farmers for growing these traditional and indigenous varieties that are so nutritionally rich and that can provide the micronutrients for balanced and good nutrition. So with that, Maximo, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Kari. Now we move to Mr. Jean Vallier, Director General of International Rice Research Institute. Jean Vallier, rice is a huge commodity in the world, a lot of stress. What are you doing?
In 5 minutes. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Maximo, and everyone. Good afternoon to all. It is a pleasure, a privilege, and an opportunity to be back here at FAO and to address this topic with you all. As Director General of IRRI, it would not be a surprise that I take the perspective of rice value chain and try to cover some of the main issues. The angle of my contribution is something that was proposed to us that looks at the way we can leverage science, innovations, technologies in rice value chains to increase resilience and at the same time address the main challenges of the global rice sector. So you all know that rice is vital for food security for more than half of the world population. In this context, rice production is predicted to rise by 60 million tons, which represent more than 12% of current production, which is massive by 2030. However, there are many challenges, and what it means is that we need to produce more with less. And there are multiple challenges, as I was saying, that we need to overcome in the next few years. I will only focus on 3 today with you: policy, markets and trade, climate change, and nutrition. So you probably all have heard that about the India announcements last Thursday about the rice export ban. This regards non-basmati rice exports, and this is likely to put the global rice supplies at risk. So the international market, as we know, in rice is relatively thin. It represents less than 9% of global production, which means it is volatile and it is susceptible to shocks, in particular price shocks. And this situation is already representing a source of concerns globally, but in particular in Africa, where we have a massive import bill already. So the first point is to make African rice value chain more resilient and to this kind of policy shocks. We need to make sure that we turn Africa into a more self-reliant continent in rice, which means boosting production throughout the continent. And that can only be achieved if we combine access to better technologies and innovations, such as varieties, better agronomic practices, combined with, very importantly, addressing market failures, and of course, looking at the right production incentives, the policies that will support this massive effort. The second point I wanted to make is about climate. As you all know, rice value chains are exposed to climate change. Deltas in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, are rice baskets and are under considerable threats that are related to sea level rise, salinization, subsidence, and more. And so this calls for very ambitious and huge adaptation measures to safeguard these rice-based food systems because many millions of people depend on them for their livelihoods. But rice is also a source of greenhouse gas emissions. Irrigated rice emits methane. And it is, after livestock, the second largest source of methane emissions in the world. It represents roughly 11% of global methane emissions. This is due to water management practices, not rice per se. However, solutions exist to produce low carbon rice. And you may have heard about alternate wetting and drying, direct seeded rice that could be applied in many production areas, including Africa, and it is already being adopted at scale in Asia. And that can, the combination of these technologies and practices can help reduce emissions by up to 60%. So producing low carbon rice is potentially also very interesting in voluntary rice carbon markets, which are potentially a source of higher incomes for the rice value chains as a whole.
Chambali, if you can wrap up, please. If you can start wrapping up. Thank you. If you can start wrapping up.
Yeah, countries like Vietnam are already thinking about turning 1 million hectares into low carbon, and that is a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity if we manage to fetch higher prices through also carbon markets that would help to transform the global rice sector. Last point on nutrition very quickly, Maximo. Rice is often seen as the villain when it comes to nutrition because highly processed rice is contributing to diabetes type 2 or fueling obesity. But IRI has come up with new rice varieties that are low glycemic index or ultra low glycemic index rice that can actually help really address these nutrition issues. And these varieties are already available for dissemination. It can make value chains more resilient because these traits can also be adapted to existing varieties that farmers may prefer, and therefore already have market value and can be incorporated as additional qualities that could actually help farmers fetch a higher price in the market. So I know it is short, but there are a lot more things that could be said about the way to make rice value chains more resilient.
Thank you.
But I hope we will have questions and more time. Thank you very much.
Okay, now let me move to emergency situations and protracted crisis to Jerry Jan van Uffelen, Senior Advisor of the Food System and Resilience in Protracted Crisis in Wageningen University.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to sit on this panel. That's an honor. I'm representing a partnership of different universities and training centers in the Horn of Africa and alliances with the Netherlands Food Partnership and FAO. So my talk is basically about the development of value chains, agri-food systems in protracted food crises. We also work very closely with FAO on the FNS RAPRO program. I think it's all clear that these protracted food crises are of great societal concern. 250 million people in food crises or worse, almost 60 countries that face food crises, and a number of these countries face protracted food crises. These crises have been going on for years and years, often decades. And therefore, I think it's safe to say that, let's say, these crises are no longer an exception, but has become part of almost a normalcy, and therefore need also a different way of engagement. beyond the provision of humanitarian assistance. And we believe with the partners that the food systems transformation agenda is offering a unique perspective in terms of localization, taking serious local institutions, working with them, investing in them. Whether these are, let's say, universities, training centers, community-based or government-linked, I mean, let's take them serious. That's important. And also to break through silos and work with humanitarian development and peace actors. We also believe that for any meaningful work in the development of agri-food systems and value chains starts with really understanding how food systems work and how food systems can anticipate, transform, adapt in the face of crises. These can be conflict, and we all know that conflict is one of the main drivers affecting food systems and food systems outcomes. So I think that's very important. How do food systems work? How do they produce outcomes? How are they being affected with shocks and stresses, and the way we engage in protracted crisis situations? Now, the first probing question is about how to make value chains more resilient and inclusive. Again, it starts with a better understanding of how food systems work and also the food systems, the value chains within them. It's also important to then say, okay, when we talk about value chains, what do we mean by value? Is this market-driven value? Or are we also talk about survival values of people that live in these countries and know that, yes, there can be times that things are a little bit more stable and peaceful, but there can be a relapse. And how does that inform then our programming in building together more sustainable value chains? There's a lot of attention by the external interveners in formal systems, while we know that a lot of people depend on informal systems and that these informal systems have been remarkably resilient. But there's very little acknowledgement on this one and investment in it. And then, of course, the big question, how do we ensure that these value chains can be equitable, inclusive and sustainable, and how do we engage the younger generation and make things attractive in the domain of agriculture? Now, these four questions, together with the partners that we are working with, we try to address in, let's say, the design and facilitation of food systems resilience dialogues that involve basically all relevant actors and partners. Second question, risk management strategies, resilience, strategies adopted by countries. In better understanding food systems and value chains that function within food systems, what are the existing resilience capacities and strengths? And let's try to build on those. Also out of respect and acknowledgement that there is a lot of resilience and that resilience is maintained even in deep crisis situations. In South Sudan, we work on seed systems. It's a very crucial value chain because it underpins food systems performance in times of relative peace, but also in times of conflict. So we look into ways how these seed systems have changed over the last 20 years as a result of these shock stresses, but also about the way we intervened in these systems. What is the current status of these seed systems? What is then the performance of these seed systems in terms of food systems functioning? And based on these, this dialogue, we then create a common shared vision across the different actors and then say, okay, what then are the pathways to grasp that vision? We then look into seed systems in terms of narrowing the food gap. We talk about food diversification. We also talk about, let's say, fodder-forage systems, farmer-herder interactions, but also into the silvopastoral systems. And then what is very important, once you have, let's say, the finance, the investment, then how do we facilitate learning, capacity building, and adaptive and flexible programming? So that brings me to the third question on public-private partnerships.
Please, if you can start wrapping up,
development.
Please. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we really need is a food systems governance framework, and we don't think that that framework is in place. Principled approaches to guide the development of value chain and agri-food development. Localization and working, let's say, across humanitarian development peace actors, very important. The development of funding approaches, principled funding for making responsible investments. And I think that donors are having to play a very critical role in making the food systems resilience agenda a success. And last, what we need is a knowledge ecology where we invest in learning, capacity building, and evidence-based flexible programming.
Thank you so much. So we have moved from large-scale farm to medium farmer, family farmers, from Africa to Asia, North Africa, Brazil, South America, to technology, innovations with the VAX initiative. And now let me move to the dreamer. So Mr. Roy Steiner, you have very challenging ideas and innovative projects that you are implementing. So can you elaborate on that and how this is supporting the value chains and resilience in value chains?
Thank you. I'm honored to be called a dreamer. Hopefully it's not just a dream. I do think of myself as a long-term optimist, but if I'm honest with you all right now, I am a short-term pessimist. I think that the next 2 or 3 decades are going to be the most challenging that humanity has ever seen. I think the question of resilience is going to result in the fact that we don't build resilient enough systems is going to result in hundreds of millions of people dying, potentially billions. And it's going to affect all of us in this room. So this issue of resilience is not some theoretical thing. It is very real. And I think that it's not just the climate change that we've been talking about, and it's not just the economics and the finance, but it's because of the greatest, I think one of the greatest enemies of resilience is the conflict and the polarization that's currently increasing in the world. And we all know that the more polarization there is, the more systems break down. So I don't mean to be too much of a downer, but let me add some two principles and strategies, I think, that have already been mentioned that we need to really double down on. One is diversity, and the second is collaboration. Diversity at all levels, diversity of crops. We know that the more diversity, as Carrie mentioned, the more diversity we have, the more resilient. The more soil diversity, the more economic and company diversity. We are, in many places, consolidating so much and concentrating power and wealth in the hands of just a few. That is not a resilient system. That is going to fail. And yet we're blindly walking into that system and just allowing it to happen. We can make a difference by enabling the we do need large companies, but we need to protect and increase the amount of the diversity of companies that we have in our economic system. So, and we need diverse decision makers. And I know there's only one woman on this panel, but I know when men and women collaborate, that is much more powerful than when men only collaborate or women only collaborate. So we need that diversity. And then finally, I think the collaboration issue is so critical because we are in a world that is polarizing so quickly. And we know that humanity only advances when we have unity, only advances when we collaborate in a way that enables everyone to advance. And we need to build those systems. So I'm going to leave with three things. And as I think my colleague from Morocco said, that collaboration requires a whole process of including the whole range of stakeholders. And we're slowly getting better at it, but as humanity, we're not very good at collective action. And we are going to, unfortunately, suffer pain, a lot of pain, because we're not good at collective action. Last thing, I know I'm running out of time. I really believe in decarbonizing the food value chain. I think the increase in for example, solar energy. We have a global energy alliance for people and planet. We need to enable distributed energy throughout that value chain, so when shocks happen, we can recover. This idea of localized and thinking about landscape level is really important. Because at the end of the day, when shocks happen, it's the local industries, it's the local businesses that are there. I visited New Orleans right after the big hurricane that devastated half the city. Who was left? Who was providing food in that city? It was the local grocery store. All the big ones had left, and they didn't come back for 6 months. And then finally, we need to really build. We know these things are going to happen. Let's build safety nets, in particular school meals. It's the most powerful, most effective safety net we have, and every child needs to have access to a nourishing school meal. And we build those systems, that creates an incredible safe level of resilience in society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I wish to thank all the panel, and let me now pass the floor to Mr. David Catroot, Director of Program of WFP, to close the event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Massimo, and I know we're over time. I'm going to use the 4 minutes that we had where we started late just to distill out a few points and hopefully take us forward. Thank you also to the panelists, and always a pleasure work with Massimo and his team on collaborating for this very valuable session today. Now, essentially, we had a very broad awareness of food systems forged by the summit, and you can see today that as we've advanced, we've really honed in on specific aspects of that which really matter, in this case, specific value chains with specific commodities. A value chain perspective really helps us move beyond the compartmentalization of just agricultural production of specific commodities and think about how they relate to that end-use consumption. Clearly, the value of a food systems approach. Value chain analysis offers that a framework for integrating multiple sectors and disciplines such as agriculture, infrastructure, energy, environment, and so on. And value chain development can be a tool to support both operational and policy decision-making. We found this in WFP. Operationally, we see some of our supply-side interventions, such as smallholder support, post-harvest losses, ecosystem rehabilitation, and climate insurance, can be combined with interventions on the demand side, such as pro-smallholder farmer contracting for procuring food, working with SME traders, and in ensuring traceability of procured food. And these are being applied also in public procurement actions as well, and we're advising in that regard. Value chain analysis also helps provide valuable insight on informing policy interventions undertaken by national governments, well represented today, supported by entities like FAO on the normative work. This value chain perspective, which helps us identify challenges across sectors, also provides a valuable platform for more effective coordination between a broad range of actors, supporting a multi-stakeholder effort, which is a vision of the Food Systems Summit process. And this can ultimately help us strive toward more effective and inclusive solutions. Now, today's panelists provided us a good sense of both those operational and policy applications of value chain analysis. But what we heard from the last interventions also, and the rest of the panel, highlighted the need for more investment in the area of research on this growing topic. And what I've been pleased to see the research advancing, just as all of you have, I'm sure, but there can be scope for more context-specific research to better understand the impact and use of value chain analysis, particularly in fragile settings, and that came up in some of the interventions, so that we can understand how value chains function and can be strengthened even in areas of stress, such as refugees, displaced persons, environments, and even conflict settings. This is a new area, and we're embarking on this now to learn more. Now, this will not only support and complement traditional life-saving interventions that take place in these contexts, but, and this goes back to David Laborde at the beginning, we can simultaneously lay the foundation to look at transition to a more resilient and food system moving forward, hopefully out of those conflict and crisis situations. A truly nexus approach in essence. Now, we hope, and this is my final points, we hope that today's panel and the excellent interventions of all our speakers has helped not only to raise awareness of this the critical role of value chains in strengthening food systems more generally, but hopefully this also sparks a broader, more multi-stakeholder discussion that we can take through the rest of this week and beyond as we look ahead to the SDG Summit, UNGA, COP28, and even the next time we convene in a stock-taking moment in a couple of years' time. With that, on behalf of FAO and WFP, let me thank you all for your attention and all the panelists for their interventions. Thank you. Yeah, probably took 3.5 minutes.